This was told to me by a late elder in Chiging named Johnny Debosque. And Johnny Debosque, his father and his father was named Oga, and that in Ojibwe means the pickerel. And then this fellow, the pickerel, he was named after his great grandfather, who actually signed the treaty at Michigiwadinong in 1781, but also the St. Joseph's Island conveyance in the 1790s. Oga was a great chief back then, and he was described as being an overseer of Anishinaabe lands. So when he actually signed that St. Joseph's Island conveyance, he actually signs it as a quote unquote Indian witness. And it's because of his role as a chief that oversaw these lands that's why he actually was a witness to that rather than a signatory to signing it away. So these people, the Oga, he had a son named Nibalcom, and Nibalcom fought during the War of 1812. And then Nibalcom had a son named Debasque. And now this name Debasque is still carried on in Chiging. This name is still carried. But the Debasque people were the one that came back to Manitoulin Island after the 1836 treaty. And what was told at that time by Johnny Debasque, he was told this story by his granddad and his father, of course, who was his father was a chief for many years. What he told me, what Johnny Debosque told me, was that he says, Mabadash Debosque, and when he says this Debosque, meaning the chief in the 1840s, he said he moved back here, and this Debosque gi bimshkoka mampi minising. And what that means is that this Debosque then walked all around the island, and he looked for a place to live. And when he looked for this place to live, he ended up coming out this way on the south shore of Manido Minis, all the way out to the west end, and then he walked on the north shore of the island. And then on his way back, at that time he lived in Weequamcong, and Weequamcong had the priests there at that time. The Jesuits had established a mission there. And so a number of Odawa chiefs lived there and a number of Ojibwe chiefs. And Debosque was one of the Ojibwe chiefs that lived there. Anyway, Johnny Debosque told me that his ancestor walked this whole island, walked around looking for a place to live where his people could make their own place, because he was living in Weequamcong at the time. And then what Johnny had said was, there's too many chiefs there. And he says, and then when I started doing archival research, and I found in 1847 that the Indian agent at the time, George Ironside, had said that a chief named Debosque here at Weequamcong, against my orders, left and went to look for a place to live on the island, and he has found a place at Michigiwadinong, a place called Michigiwadinong, and that's the name of what now non-native people call cup and saucer, but the Anishinaabe way of calling it that is Michigiwadinong. So Debosque walked all around this island, the chief Debosque walked all around this island looking for a place to live for his people. And what Johnny had told me said that Debosque had met a fella named Makadebin. And this Makadebin had told him when he met him over at Waebjong. Waebjong means little current. It doesn't translate as little current. It actually means the current goes back and forth. There's two interpretations of what that name means. Waebjong, it flows back and forth, or Waebjong, it means it starts flowing. So it depends on how, if it's the Odawa would say Waebjong, the Ojibwe say Waebjong. So a swing, like a child's swing, is Waebizawin, and that means it goes back and forth. But Waebjong, it means it starts, it commences. Anyway, that's where this Debosque met Makadebin. And then Makadebin said, if you walk 30 miles of here or so, well, in Ojibwe they said, Simdena Dababan dash Kabmasse, you will walk 30 measures. So back then they were using leagues. So it might have been leagues or miles. And you will come to a deep bay, he said, and then if you walk into that bay, you'll find another lake. And on that lake, you'll see there's lots of fish. And somebody could live there year round, is what he was told. So Debaski came back and he saw those places, and he realized that there were bountiful fish there, and that there were fish in the bay, but also fish in Lake Minamoi and what is called Otter Lake as well. So he knew of these places, and then that's when he said he was going to call his band together, who had all scattered, and they were going to reform their band, and they all came and moved back, and they all founded Chiging in 1847, and the Indian agent had written about it. But I first heard this story from Johnny Debaske, and it was the oral tradition that was handed down. So, to me, what he's talking about there is being able to procure a livelihood, and that was why Chiging was formed, and that was why the people settled there, and why the chief moved there, and so that they could live there year round without having to engage in seasonal migration. Because of course at that time, the 1840s, the Indian agents and the government and the settlers are coming, and they're trying to get the native people to not go to the trap line in the winter, and to not go to their sugar bush in the spring, and then not go pick berries in the summer, and then go to their fishing grounds as well in the summer. They're trying to get, the colonial forces are trying to constrict indigenous and Anishinaabe people's movement, and that's what he ended up saying, that he was going to live in Chiging because he could then stay there year round. So the other story that this Johnny Debaske had told me, at that time I asked him, Anish Ediming Michiging, what does Michiging mean? And Michiging, he says, he started this story. He says, Chajaje ko gi the Bajimegaza Maban Nanabojo. They used to talk about this fella named Nanabush. That's how Johnny started telling me the story of what Chiging means. And what Johnny had said was, down by Lake Erie way, this Nanabush was teasing somebody. I don't know who he was teasing, he says, but he says they really wanted to lay a beating on him. In fact, they wanted to kill him. He teased them so much, and he kept teasing them and teasing them. So he's coming up from Lake Erie, and they want to lay a beating on him, and he's being chased and pursued all the way up. He comes up to what we now, of course, call the Bruce Peninsula, Saugeen Peninsula, and he comes to what is now modern-day Tobermory, and he's being pursued. And so what some people say is the Haudenosaunee people, who we call Nottawic, are chasing him, and they're going to lay a beating on him. So Nanabush had left his canoe there up by Tobermory, and his grandmother. And he told his grandmother, get in the canoe. He yells out to her, get in the canoe. And so Nanabush jumps in the canoe, and she jumps in the canoe. And so then they start paddling, and they come paddling across, and they hit these little islands on the way, and they come from Tobermory, and they cross over to what is now called Providence Bay. But that's again, this is what the old man said, Johnny Debaske said, Apane Jaganash Gweknakadan. The Jaganash, meaning the white man, or the non-native, always changes the name. That's what he said. Pane Gweknakadang. Pane Gweknakadang wa Jaganash. He always changes that non-native person. So now we call that place Providence Bay Cha'ajwing, but that's based on when Providence Bay was a thriving community. It's reviving now, but it just means the one on the opposite end, meaning of Little Kern, that there's another one. And then, that bay is actually called, that river, of course, is still called Mindamoya, and that's a anglicized version of Mindimwe, meaning old lady. So Nanabush and his grandmother, they land at Providence Bay, what is now called Providence Bay, and they go up that river, but they beach their canoe. And when they're coming up there, the Haudenosaunee in the meantime, they quickly made an elm bark canoe. But those elm bark canoes aren't as fast or light as a weekwas jiman, as a birch bark canoe. And then that birch bark canoe comes up. Nanabush and his grandmother get off, and they start running. And of course, his grandmother is slow, and she's kind of in the way. So he says, "Quick, get on my back." So he puts his grandma on his back, and they start running. And they're running and running. Meanwhile, Nanabush, as he's running, all these thorns and brambles are scratching his legs up, and his legs are all getting cut up, and he's bleeding. And that's what he says, "Gib me gishkagadeshin, gib me gishkagadeshkash, o Nanabojo." As he's running along, his legs are getting cut up, and he gets around Lake Minnemoya. He keeps going. He thinks he's going to lose them because those Haudenosaunee, the Nottawic, are coming. He thinks he's going to lose them through the bush. Anyway, his legs, after you're carrying a load for a while, your knees get weak, and that's what he says, his knees start getting weak, and they start knocking. And he knows he isn't going to be able to get further along if he has his grandmother. So what he does is he grabs his grandmother by the scruff of the neck here, and by the small of her back, the clothes there. And he swings her around and around, and he throws her up in the air, and she lands right in the middle of the lake there. Now Zalgiganing. And then the Jognosh again, like I said, Pane Gi Weknakadan. The Jognosh always changes the name. They call that Treasure Island, but that's Mindimwe Minis, Old Lady Island. And that's what Johnny DeBosque said. Mi wa Nanabojo Okamis son. That is Nanabush's grandmother that he threw there. So he kept on his way, and as he started running, and this is the words that really struck me, is that Johnny then said, "Maba Nanabojo gib me jibap to mampim chiging." Nanabush ran right through Chiging, and as he was going through Chiging, he ran towards Oreneking Cup and Saucer. He ran over towards what is now called the Cup and Saucer, and that's when these people were just again about to catch him, and then that's when he decided he was going to turn around and make a stand. He was going to fight them, and then that's when he says he turned around, he grabbed a spear pole and the spearheads, and that's what that name means in Ojibwe. Michigiw is the spearhead, and this is an old spearhead that was made of some of them are the tine of an antler, and some are the bone, like the shin bone of an ungulate, and then they put barbs in them, and the number of barbs that are on that Michigiw, so it goes up like this, and then there's barbs on one side, and they put a hole here, and in that hole they have a toggle. This is the Michigiw, this part, and then the spear handle is the one that you affix to it. But when you're going after trout, it has 3 barbs, and they call that Nemegus Michigiw, trout Michigiw. Then if it has 2, they call that a Mick Michigiw, and that means beaver spearhead. And then if it has 1, they call it Neme Michigiw, and that's for a sturgeon. Anyway, they would tie that rope to that, and then they would stab whatever their prey was, and then whenever they stabbed that prey, it would swim away, and then this line would be stuck on it if it's a beaver or a trout or a sturgeon, and then after that got tired out, then they'd pull that in. Anyway, that's Michigiw, because we don't use that. The thing that's important here that I didn't tell you, nobody knew. The name was lost for a little while. And so what Johnny had said, when Nanabush was running along there and he decided to make a stand, that's when he dropped that Michigiw. Chigo one dashki bigijwebanan, ki bigijwebanan, he says. This is when he actually dropped those spearheads there. And he wasn't sure if those were arrowheads. Johnny says, "I'm not sure if those are arrowheads, but they're used in hunting," he said. So he dropped that. Nanabush dropped that there, and then he says, "and the spear handle." So he was going to make a fight, but then in his how pumped up he was and also how scared he was, he dropped them. And then that's why when you go, he says, then he dropped them and he turned around and he saw them coming. Then he took off. Ginig Jibwe. He took off again. But that's what the story is that when you go to Cup and Saucer and you drive over the hill coming to Honora, from the north, and you're driving south on Highway 6, and you get on top of that hill at Honora, you'll see the Cup and Saucer, and you'll see it's like a platform. One's higher than the other. And if you ever climb up there, then you go out on Lookout 1, and that's a barb. Lookout 2, and that's a barb. Lookout 3, that's a barb. And that's what that is. If you were able to look at that as a large, think of that as a large spearhead and a large spear handle, and that you'll see that they're not lined up because he dropped them and then he took off. So that's what we call that. Why it's called Michigiwadinong. Michigiw means the spearhead, and then Adin in Ojibwe our words are like Latin. You put parts together. So when you put that Michigiwadin, it means the hill or the promontory in the shape of the Michigiw, of the arrowhead. And then when you add that ong at the end, that just makes it the locative, meaning that's the location of it. So that's what that means, the bluff in the shape of the spearhead. So why I'm telling you this story is because our story has been erased here. And like I've been saying, this Gweknakadang, they changed the name. And now what I like about this story, what Johnny DeBosque told me, is that from our oral tradition, this got passed down. And it started to almost get lost because what Johnny didn't know, he wasn't sure if those were arrowheads or spearheads, but he just knew they were with hunting and that they had to be put together. But that Nanabush dropped them. And then, but I did further research and I found in old dictionaries that word Michigiw. And then I knew how Ojibwe works, that you put these morphemes, word parts that carry meaning, and you put them together, then you're able to get a more exact description of what that is. So anyway, another part of that story, you asked about the flora and fauna. What had happened to him, like I said, his legs were getting all cut up and all bloody. And so as he was running, he noticed that his blood rubbed off on these little bushes. And that's, he says, oh, Musqua Bimajins, and some say Musqua Bimanagons, I will call you Red Willow. And Mashkiki Kadao, you will be medicine for my aunties, he said. You will be medicine for my aunties and for my grandchildren. So that's what, in that story, the blood from Nanabush's legs is on these brush, and then he ends up making red willow of that. And this is a medicine for Anishinaabe people. And some say it's it's got many uses, of course. One of them is it actually used to be in what we call kanikkanik. And kanikkanik was a smoking mixture. You'd put tobacco in there and this red willow bark, as well as the lichen off of a rock. So you mix those all up, and then you'd have your smoking mixture. So it's part of our medicines, but there are other medicines that are used for it has other medicinal applications as well. So this that's part of why this place is special. Red willow grows everywhere, of course, but to us the story is that Nanabush created that here, and that then and when he created it, he gave it to us, and then it proliferated, and our knowledge base grew of it, and then also it assisted us in our survival here. So for us Anishinaabe people, I was told again by a late elder named Gijigo, and this Gijigo helped me as well in different matters. But he said that when he was a young man, growing up in Wikwamkong, that he was told by his elders that, and he was a known medicine man, this fellow. he was told as well that all any illness that we have, any ailment that we have, the cure is here on the island. That's what he said he was told as a child. So that's why this place is special for us. Is one, our greatest teacher, Nanabush, was here. And we say Nanabujo gi ba nameto. And what that means is Nanabush left his mark, he left signs here of his that he passed by. And of course that he left that sign there with making that river, Old Woman River, Mindamoya River, Ndimwe Zibe. And then of course what now the Jaganash calls Treasure Island, but what we call Ndimwe Minis, Nanabojo Okamis, Nanabush's grandmother. And then of course what they changed to call Cup and Saucer, we call Michigiwadinong, the bluff in the shape of the spearhead. The other thing that I point out to with that is this name, Michigiwadinong, that when I looked in that dictionary written in 1870s, it says Michigiu, un dart, and it's written in French, un dart, a spear. And then the footnote there said the Anishinaabe are no longer really use this word because they all use metal spears. So this is in 1870. The word was already falling into disuse and was becoming obsolete and archaic. But it's through the stories that we tell each other that we actually keep that alive. And that's what it's ancient. So the other thing is, if you go into you go to many museums in North America, you'll see that tool, and it'll always be listed as a prehistoric spearhead, a prehistoric tool. And that shows to me how ancient our occupation to Manitoulin Island is. That we named a place here on Manitoulin off an ancient tool that we use to gain our sustenance and our subsistence and our livelihood. And that's, to me, that's what Manitoulin and Michigiwadinong mean. And that all the medicines that we have here, we had basically like what I said at the beginning, we had everything here. And just like how the Creator, when he made this place last for himself, he chose everything the best. And then that's what our stories have been, that we actually say the Creator chose the cleanest water, the clearest water, the sweetest water, and he put around here all these maple trees, and he put around all these different medicines, and he put these different plants for us, that everything that we would need would be here on this island. So that's for us as Anishinaabe people, that's why this place is special. We were told that we have everything we need because the Creator made it for himself, that there would be everything that we'd need would be here. And then the stories that were told by our elders that were passed down, they told us the same thing, that any ailment we ever had, if we were able to ask the Nido, the spirit, and then we made the proper petitions and we asked in a proper way, we would be given an answer for that. So that's why Nido Manis is an important and powerful place for Anishinaabe people. But the good thing is that they actually put up the sign, they changed the name from Cup and Saucer, and they put the Anishinaabe name, Michigiwadinong, on there. And they actually, if you go up and do the hike, you'll see the signage that it talks about that story, and it talks about that this came from Johnny DeBosque and the family that passed that story down, and that he thankfully told me